The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the producer and those appearing in this show and do not necessarily represent the views of DerryCam, the town of Derry, or any of its staff or affiliates. Hi, I'm Anthony Henry. Welcome back to America's Ass. We are on episode 27. It was kind of cold out this morning, kind of warmed up a little. I walked here, as always. But anyway, we are here with Representative Carol McGuire and Representative Dan McGuire. So, Carol, we'll start with you. Take a minute to introduce yourself.
Yes, Carol McGuire. I live in Epsom. I've been a state rep for 8 terms now, and I'm currently the chair of the House Executive Departments and Administration Committee, plus the Commission on the Retirement Benefits, the Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, and the Building Code Oversight Committee. So I'm rather busier than most state reps, I'm afraid, but I've learned an awful lot and I've mostly enjoyed it.
Dan?
So hi, I'm Dan McGuire. Been married to Carol 41 years. And I've been a state rep. I'm in my 4th term. So I did 6 years, took 6 years off, and now I'm back. And I'm on the Finance Committee. So the main thing we deal with is the state budget. And I also chaired the Special Committee on Dedicated Funds. So we could talk about that, I suppose.
All right, well, we're going to stick to New Hampshire on this episode because there's been a lot of big New Hampshire news in terms of elections. Obviously, there's the big city elections last week. We could cover that in a minute.
Manchester, yeah.
The big one is that the first in the nation date has finally been announced. So,
I believe so. I think it's January 23rd. It's a Tuesday. And I think everybody is set now. You know, Iowa's a week before and so on. So very, very settled.
So there was everyone knows this by now, but there was the big controversy with the DNC trying to move it to South Carolina to try to fudge up their numbers to get, because that's what happened when Biden ran in 2020. South Carolina saved him, specifically Jim Clyburn saved him. He would not have won the presidency without South Carolina. So they're trying to use it as their slingshot to try to get Biden back in.
Yeah.
Yes. Meanwhile, the whole process completely confused all the Democrats in the state who don't know if they should be pulling a Republican ticket and voting for not Trump, or pulling a Democrat ticket and writing in Biden. Apparently, there's some people recommending both of those strategies, but they're not very compatible.
Yeah, I think there's 20 running on the Democrat side, and Biden's not one of them, right?
Yes, I know Biden is doing a write-in campaign in New Hampshire. I know Representative Custer, for example, some of the big-name Democrats are trying to do this write-in thing because they want to kind of try to stay in the middle, I guess. Try to be like, hey, we're okay with South Carolina, but we also want Biden to win if it is going to be New Hampshire first. So, and there's also Dean Phillips running in New Hampshire, which was kind of a surprise to some people, the congressman from Minnesota. And there's Marianne Williamson, the author.
Yes. Yeah. And a few less well-known candidates that just want the honor and glory of being on the ballot.
Well,
I believe Vermin Supreme is running as a Democrat this year.
Yes, he is.
He always runs.
It'd be great if Vermin Supreme could beat Biden, you know.
Write-ins are incredibly difficult to do. Even if you're a good candidate and well-known, running a write-in campaign is not easy. And so I would expect Biden to do much worse as a write-in candidate than he would if he were on the ballot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on the Republican side, we had Tim Scott drop out just the other day. The field is narrowing rapidly. I expect Burgum's going to drop out soon if he hasn't already. So right now, it's
my favorite Larry Elder didn't even sign up. So there you go.
Yeah. So right now, it's just Trump, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, DeSantis, and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah. So have you endorsed anyone?
No, there's a few I like more than others, but seeing that this is my first election where I have a better understanding of what's going on, I just want to kind of stay, outside, watch everything, take it all in.
Yeah, well, I'm not prepared to endorse anyone because everyone I have endorsed has immediately dropped out. So I'm a black thumb as far as voting
Yeah.
for president can't.
Yeah, last time I wanted Rand Paul, and he dropped out a week before the election. So I voted for Carly Fiorina, and she dropped out the day after the election. So it's
Yeah.
like-
So,
but this time, maybe a
One
kiss
never
of death.
knows.
But I've endorsed DeSantis. So
I've met DeSantis a couple times. What attracted you to DeSantis?
I just think every time he talks, I like what he's saying. You know what I mean? I agree with what he's doing. I mean, he was right on the vaccine and COVID in a way that Trump wasn't, frankly.
Yeah.
And the way he runs his state. And just recently he said, you know, to get our fiscal house in order, we're going to have to have some kind of means test on Social Security. And I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we can't go down off this fiscal cliff, you know. I mean, our state, for example, I'm on finance, and we're like $6 billion in the hole on our retirement system, but that's like a drop in the bucket compared to the trillions that we are in Washington, right? It's
Yeah.
you know, it's peanuts.
So with DeSantis, when he did all the, you know, basically freeing the beaches, I like to call it, because he made Florida free. That's one thing I think Trump has been a little unfair about. And usually I defend President Trump a lot because everyone knows he's always unfairly targeted.
Absolutely.
But
yeah.
I think his attacks that he does, I think they end up hurting him more than he's trying to hurt everyone else. Because, you know, I think Trump's biggest enemy is his mouth, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
No
some of that
doubt about
stuff
it.
makes him look childish. Yeah.
Yeah. And as for the other candidates, Vivek Ramaswamy's getting a lot of attention for all the attacks he does. Most notably, my personal favorite, calling Nikki Haley Dick Cheney in heels. I thought that was funny. So what are your thoughts on Vivek?
Yeah, he's attractive too. I just, from our experience in New Hampshire, I don't think being president is an entry-level job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't know. What do you think, Carol?
Exactly. Smart guy, seems to work hard, but running for president, I mean, that seems like a real stretch as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
The other thing is he's enjoying running for president too much. And our experience in the legislature shows that there are some people who really like running for office, and then there are people who do a good job once they're in office, and there's not much of an overlap between the two groups.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing you discover is there's two phases to being a politician. One is the campaign and running, and the other is being in office and legislating or you know, being executive. And the skill set for the two are not very similar, right? I mean, one is about being a salesman, kind of, and the other is about being a manager or you know, decision making. And so it's not easy. There are certain people who they love running for office and they like meeting people and you know, all that. But then when they get there, they don't do much, right? And there's others who are kind of shy and whatever, but they're great. You know, they're smart and they know what they're doing when they get there, if they get there. So, you know.
I've made it a personal goal to try to meet every candidate on the Republican side. I've met all of them but Trump and Burgum. So I've done pretty good. I like all of them. They're all very different, not just in some of their, you know, individual takes, but in their personalities, in their like attitudes. They're all very different different people. And I think we'd be good with any of them, but I think whoever wins New Hampshire is going to take it all, I think. And there is a front runner, Trump. It's looking like he's almost definitely the front runner, but we'll see. So
The voters will speak, and you can't always tell who they're going to vote for or why.
yeah. So
We'll see.
moving on to, I guess, the Manchester elections from last week.
Yeah, that was really good news, I thought. You know, we were feeling a little down because we worked so hard. We had a special election for state rep in Northwood, Nottingham, right? And I think, did you interview
Jim was
Jim?
on the show,
Yeah.
yes.
And great candidate. He's a selectman in the bigger of the two towns, but he didn't end up doing that well. And so that was and we worked hard. We knocked doors and everything. So that was a disappointment. But this Manchester is obviously a much bigger deal and is very positive, right? I mean, so we're getting mixed messages from the voters, I think.
I think it's
As always.
I think it's a big statement that the biggest city in New Hampshire that has had Democrat rule in almost every seat on their school board, board of aldermen, and the mayor, people were so fed up with all of the craziness with the homeless crisis that we elected a Republican mayor, Jay Ruitt. We elected a Republican majority board of aldermen for the first time in 34 years. School board, we didn't do that well. Joy Senecal, who, by the way, will be on next episode, was the only Republican that won, besides Carlos Gonzalez on the school board. And with school boards, that can be said for every school board in the nation, I think. Well,
It's tough,
most of them. I could say it for Derry. Derry has 6 liberals, 1 conservative, 1 Republican. And I just find school elections really interesting because it's mostly the PTA moms that go and vote. The regular voters don't seem to go out for it much, even though they often end up more important.
Well, the same thing in our town. The school budget is 3 or 4 times as big as the town budget. But when we have a town meeting, the school budget gets presented. I ask a question, one other person asks a question, and then we go away quietly. The town budget, there's half a dozen people asking intelligent questions about this and what the priorities are and why we're spending so much on the new truck. That always gets lots of debate. And so we're spending our energy worrying about the town budget when it's the school budget that's driving our taxes up. So I don't quite understand the why it's that way, but it is pretty consistently.
So I'll dive more into it on next episode because we're having a school board member in Manchester on. But in Derry, I've often talked about the new school thing we're doing here. If this new school gets approved in Derry that we're thinking about building, it'll add $46 per month to the tax rate.
$46
per month, and the school is expected to cost $71.2 million.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So,
gold-plated toilets.
so I'll do a brief summary, I guess. We have 5 elementary schools. We voted to close 1 earlier this year. We want to close it. The school board, I shouldn't say we. The school board voted to close 1. Townspeople were not happy, but they still did it because they're the school board. They want to close a second one now and build a bigger new one that costs $71.2 million and will...
For an elementary school?
For a big elementary school.
Wow.
It'll go where Derry Village Elementary School currently is. Derry Village Elementary School will be closing at the end of this year. And if this new school gets approved, South Range School will close in a few years. And I think the new school will be up and open, if approved, by the 26 or 27 school year.
Well,
What's
that'll take care of your tax problem.
Yeah. What's the population in Derry? Is it flat, growing?
So the school's lost population. That's why that's the justification they're using for this. And the 2 schools that they want to close are kind of older and they weren't built properly. But I think, and a lot of other people in town think, that they can just be renovated and that'll be cheaper. School board disagrees. They kind of want the glory of building a new school, I think.
Yeah.
And if you watch any school board meeting in Derry, pick one, they silence anyone that disagrees with them, including me. I tried talking down. Well, I don't think I disrespected him, but I said something disrespectful to the chairman, and he said I couldn't talk if I was going to do that. So, communist Russia.
Yeah. fortunately, if you have to borrow money, which you will for 71 million, you need a supermajority vote, right?
Yes,
So
two-thirds of the
yeah.
of the voters have
Is
to
it
approve.
two-thirds or 60%? I'm not sure.
66%, so two-thirds.
Okay. Yeah. So that's not easy to get, right?
Yes,
So,
I don't think it's going to pass,
Yeah.
thankfully, but we'll see.
One never knows.
Yeah. So we'll move on to some of the bills you guys are working on for next year. We could touch on veto day too, if you guys want. So start anywhere.
Yeah, well, veto day was a surprise because for the first time, 2 of the bills that I co-sponsored were vetoed. So it was a new record for me. And one of them, House Bill 337, was a transparency bill for licensing boards that tried to put best practices for how you run a board into statute. So that was, I'd worked on it. We passed the House unanimously twice. It passed the Senate on a voice vote, and the governor went and vetoed it. So we were kind of shocked at that. So we went and fought it on the floor, explaining why it's important to have these best practices, have the transparency, and if we're trying to encourage all boards to do this, which we are, and that governor's veto message said it only applies to a few boards. Well, that's because we picked the licensing boards as a group that's under one manager at the state level, so they can all implement it. And they've had multiple complaints for many years that they're not being transparent and open with their stakeholders, the people they license and the people they regulate. So the House fairly easily overrode the veto. The Senate, however, failed to do so, so it is vetoed, and we're coming back with another version this coming year.
Yeah, I heard the governor went and talked to the Senate Republicans and twisted some arms, you know. I mean, that was just a silly veto. It was not a big deal bill, but yeah. All the other vetoes were, both bodies upheld the governor, no problem. And some of them were important. There's this money-losing wood-burning electric facility in Berlin, and finally the legislature said, well, it had a contract where it was getting this kind of subsidies. It was getting a better price for electricity than anybody else gets, right? And so there was a bill to sort of continue that because it had a deadline, and it was, you know, so, and the governor vetoed that, and appropriately, because, you know, we're just paying these guys way more than their power is worth. So that one was upheld.
The real issue with that is that it's not just that we're paying more for their power, but it's only the Eversource customers who are paying more for the power. Yeah. If you happen to be dealing with Unitil or Liberty Utilities, you don't pay any more. So why should, you know, a portion of the state pay to subsidize this plant? Yeah. And at the rates, the amount of money they were collecting, we could hire all their employees and keep them on the dole for years, and it would be cheaper.
Yeah, so that was a bad bill. But anyway, it's tough because we're, you know, we got this much of a majority, maybe even less than that much. And so, you know, just on any given day, if a few Republicans are sick or, you know, whatever, we're in the minority. And so all kinds of stuff passes.
I believe it's a one-seat majority now.
Yeah. At the moment.
Now that the election in Nashua happened.
Yeah, but there's an open seat in Coas County and an open seat in Exeter, I think it is.
Well, yeah, and the one, didn't one guy die in?
That's the one I was thinking of, Exeter.
Was it Exeter?
I think it's Exeter.
Oh, no, Lee, I think. Lee, yeah.
They're next to each other.
Yeah,
so there's a couple of open seats. And considering that the older legislators tend to, you know, be too sick to continue or die off, the younger ones get better jobs and move out of their districts, we have a number of special elections. And it's always incredibly difficult to get the Republicans to go out and vote in a special election. So in any close seat, you end up with the Democrats showing up and the Republicans not bothering.
Yeah.
And that means we lose a lot of special elections.
Yeah. I mean, that's what happens when you get 400 mostly retired people, is there's going to be life events, you know, deaths or, you know, people moving or whatever. You know, inevitably, there's going to be a handful of those every 2 years. So this isn't unusual.
Yeah. So this year we have a record number of LSRs introduced. I heard that. So I guess dive into a couple that interest you. I'm sure you're sponsoring something.
Yeah, my most interesting one is a constitutional amendment. If you followed the Claremont ruling, 30 years ago, the court came up with a really stupid ruling that said that the word cherish means pay for, right? So the Constitution, in an obscure section, says that legislators must cherish the arts and science and literature and seminaries and public schools, okay? Something like that. There's a sentence like that. And so the Supreme Court ruled that this word cherish really means pay for.
They took a little longer to explain it, but that was the gist of the message.
And therefore, you have to send, you know, so much money to public schools, all right? Well, what about the artists and the authors and the scientists? Don't we have to send money to them? Apparently not, right? I mean, it's in the same sentence. But anyways, so the thing was nonsense. So I'm putting in a constitutional amendment to say to the Supreme Court, look, this wasn't the right ruling. And the way I'm doing it is very simple. Because their argument was, the word cherish, we looked it up in the 1784 dictionary. Right? In 1784, it had a different meaning than what you and I would say today, right? That's their argument. Well, so I said, okay, we'll cross off the word cherish from 1784, and we'll replace it with the word cherish from today.
The lawyers will love that one.
So the Constitution will look the same, you see, but it'll have a different meaning because it'll be today's cherish, which means, you know, look favorably on or whatever. You know? So that's going to be a fun one. So
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Probably not effective, but it certainly will bring out the ridiculousness of how sometimes the courts go searching for something to explain it so that the result will be what they want it to be.
I know every single bill gets a public hearing, so
yeah.
there's
So I'll
that.
get to make some speeches and stuff. but something of much bigger consequence is Carol just chaired a commission dealing with the retirement system. So maybe you want to talk about that?
Yes, this year in the budget, the House included a fix for the police and firefighters who were damaged in their pensions in 2011 when we were doing everything we could to make sense out of the pension system and also the budget. We had a massive deficit that year. So they've been damaged. Their pensions are not as good as those of older ones, and the last 5 years at least, they've been trying to get them back. The House included a fix for it in the budget, but the Senate took it out, and it was the Senate's version that went forward. So the Senate also created a commission and to look into the retirement system. So we considered a number of things. The final recommendation was to include a stripped-down version that essentially got most of the firefighters who were damaged at that time, plus all new ones, and police and corrections as well, back to a pension that they would be happy with. And it was a lot cheaper than what was in the budget because it was simply that change and not all the little fine print changes that if you put into a defined benefit plan end up costing a lot more than you would think. It's amazing. We added a very small escalator for the maximum pension. You know, the maximum pension is so much based on your years of service and your salary. And we said, well, the maximum is $100,000. And so we put in a small escalator just because $100,000 is not as impressive as it used to be. And that ended up costing $60 million once it was costed out. So
Yeah,
that was not included.
little tiny benefit changes, because they're multiplied by so many employees, cost the taxpayers huge amounts of money. Right. So the main problem we're having with police and fire, which includes prison guards as well, right, the corrections officers, is that our pension system isn't quite as good as Massachusetts or Maine or Vermont, right? So some young person who wants to go into that can easily get a job elsewhere and get a pension that's a bit better than ours,
Yeah.
right?
They want half pay after 20 years, essentially.
Yes, right. So they want to work 20 years and then get half pay. So, that's normal in that business. So, and so what the consequence is, our prisons are really hurting. Not only do we have regular guards working 60 hours a week, they're required to work overtime, but we've got National Guards people helping, we've got parole officers helping in prison and so on. So we got to do something to improve the pension and let them hire again. And so we're trying to fix it, but in a way that's not, that fixes it also for the new people coming in, not just for the existing, people who are, the ones complaining the most, right?
The commission also recommended that we consider mandatory overtime like they're serving in the prison to be base pay and therefore included in the pension no matter how much they work at it. It's not currently included, and that seems unfair. Yeah. So I've got a bill in to do that. We're also considering defining that you're vested after 5 years instead of 10, which is much more comparable to what the current situation is. The 10-year vesting is a remnant from the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
So
we are just about out of time, so feel free to give a brief closing statement before we end.
Yeah. Well, I guess as you could tell, the legislature is full of details, right? And there's a lot of stuff we work on that involve money, involve details, and fortunately we have 400 people, so we have a lot of brain powers to work on those things.
Yes, it's a very absorbing hobby. The biggest group are retirees who aren't quite old enough to go to Florida yet, and it will suck up all the time you're willing to give it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Run for office. We need you.
Yeah.
Thank you both for coming on. Before we end quick, I just want to say I had my first meeting on the New Hampshire Legislative Youth Advisory Council. I am chairing family law, and I am also on criminal justice and education. So I'm really excited to do that. We didn't really do much first meeting, more organizational stuff, but really excited to see where we go. I'll make sure we review some of your bills.
All right.
So I'm Anthony Henry. This has been America's Ass. Thank you for watching.